Long, long ago, the world was a very different place. It was the Ice Age. Huge sheets of ice covered much of the land. Because so much water was frozen in ice, the oceans were lower than they are today. A strip of land connected Asia and North America. We call this land bridge Beringia. People from Asia walked across this bridge. They were brave hunters, following big animals like mammoths and mastodons. They did not know they were entering a new continent. They were simply looking for food and a safe place to live. This journey happened over thousands of years, with families and small groups moving slowly into a vast unknown land. These first people are the ancestors of Native Americans. As the centuries passed, they spread out. They moved south, east, and all across the two big continents of North and South America. The world was changing around them. The great ice sheets began to melt, and the oceans rose again. The land bridge of Beringia disappeared under the water. The people were now living in a new world, separated from the old one. They had to learn how to live in many different kinds of places, from thick forests and hot deserts to wide open plains and tall mountains. They adapted wonderfully, creating new tools and new ways of life. Over thousands of years, these early people developed into many different cultures. They were not all the same. There were hundreds of unique tribes, each with its own language, beliefs, and traditions. In the Southwest, people like the ancestral Puebloans built amazing cities in the cliffs. In the Great Plains, tribes like the Lakota hunted bison and lived a nomadic life. In the eastern woodlands, nations like the Iroquois formed powerful confederacies and farmed the rich soil. These societies were complex and full of art, stories, and deep knowledge about the land they called home. They had their own governments, trade routes, and histories long before anyone else arrived. For a very long time, these were the only people in the Americas. Then, about 1,000 years ago, Viking explorers from Scandinavia briefly landed in what is now Canada. However, their settlement did not last. The big change came much later, in 1492. An Italian explorer named Christopher Columbus, sailing for the King and Queen of Spain, crossed the Atlantic Ocean. He was looking for a new trade route to Asia, but instead landed in the Americas. His arrival marked the beginning of a huge, world-changing encounter. It was the start of a new chapter, not just for the Americas but for the entire world, bringing together people from different continents for the first time in history. After Columbus, many more Europeans began to sail across the Atlantic Ocean. They came from Spain, France, the Netherlands, and England. They were all looking for something. Some wanted gold and riches, others wanted to claim new lands for their kings and queens. Still others were looking for religious freedom, a place where they could practice their beliefs without being punished. The Spanish built a huge empire in the south, in places like Mexico and Florida. The French explored the rivers of the north, trading for furs with Native American tribes. The English came a little later, establishing their first permanent settlement at Jamestown in Virginia in 1607. The English colonies grew along the Atlantic coast. There were eventually 13 of them. Each one was different. In the north, in New England, people built small towns and focused on religion, trade, and fishing. In the middle colonies like Pennsylvania and New York, there was a great mix of people from different countries and religions. The soil was good for farming. In the South, colonies like Virginia and South Carolina had large farms called plantations. They grew crops like tobacco and cotton. This work was very hard, and soon the plantation owners began to use enslaved people from Africa to do the labor, a terrible system that would cause deep problems for the country. As the colonies grew, so did their relationship with Great Britain. At first, the colonists were proud to be British subjects, but over time, things began to change. The British government was far away across a huge ocean. The colonists started to feel that they were different, that they were Americans. The British government began to pass laws and taxes that the colonists thought were unfair. One famous law was the Stamp Act, which taxed paper goods. The colonists protested, saying there should be no taxation without representation. This meant they should not have to pay taxes unless they had their own leaders in the British government to speak for them. The anger and protests grew stronger. In Boston, colonists threw tea into the harbor to protest a tax on tea. This event is called the Boston Tea Party. The British government sent more soldiers to control the colonies. Tensions were very high. Finally, in April 1775, fighting broke out between British soldiers and colonial militiamen in the towns of Lexington and Concord. This was the start of the American Revolutionary War. A year later, on July 4, 1776, the leaders of the colonies signed the Declaration of Independence. It was a brave and bold document that declared the colonies were now free and independent states, no longer a part of Britain. Winning the war against Great Britain was not easy. The British had a powerful army and navy. The American army, led by General George Washington, was small and did not have enough supplies. But the soldiers were fighting for their freedom and their homes, which gave them great courage. With important help from France, the Americans kept fighting. After several years of hard battles, the British Army surrendered at Yorktown, Virginia, in 1781. In 1783, the Treaty of Paris was signed, and Great Britain officially recognized the United States of America as a new independent country. The 13 colonies were now 13 states. The new country needed a strong government. The leaders came together and wrote a new set of rules called the Constitution. This document created a system with a president, a Congress, and a Supreme Court. It divided power so that no single person or group could become too powerful. The Constitution is still the supreme law of the land today. With a new government in place, the United States began to grow. In 1803, President Thomas Jefferson made a deal with France to buy a huge piece of land in the middle of the continent. This was called the Louisiana Purchase. It nearly doubled the size of the country and opened the way for westward expansion. As the nation grew larger, a deep and terrible problem grew with it: slavery. In the southern states, the economy depended on enslaved African Americans who worked on cotton and tobacco plantations. In the northern states, slavery was slowly disappearing, and many people believed it was morally wrong. The country was divided. New states in the West became battlegrounds over whether they would allow slavery or be free. This disagreement became more and more heated. People in the North and the South saw the world in very different ways. They argued fiercely about states' rights and the power of the national government. In 1861, the conflict exploded into the Civil War. Several southern states decided to leave the United States and form their own country, called the Confederacy. The president, Abraham Lincoln, said they could not leave. He was determined to keep the country together. The war that followed was the deadliest in American history. Brother fought against brother for 4 long, bloody years. In the end, the North, also called the Union, won the war. The country was reunited and slavery was finally abolished everywhere in the nation. But the war left deep scars, and a long, difficult road of rebuilding and healing lay ahead for all Americans. After the Civil War, the United States entered a period of incredible growth and change. The late 19th century was an age of invention and industry. Railroads stretched across the entire continent, connecting the East Coast to the West Coast. Big cities grew rapidly as factories were built, and new industries like steel and oil became powerful. Millions of immigrants arrived from Europe and Asia, seeking jobs and a better life. They worked in the factories and helped build the growing cities. This era was called the Gilded Age because, on the surface, the country seemed rich and successful, but underneath there were many problems, like poor working conditions and poverty. As the United States became an economic powerhouse, it also began to look outward and play a bigger role in world affairs. In 1898, the country fought a short war with Spain called the Spanish-American War. As a result, the United States gained control of territories like the Philippines, Guam, and Puerto Rico. This marked a moment when America started to act like an imperial power, similar to the big empires in Europe. The country was no longer isolated from the rest of the world. It was becoming a global player, with interests and responsibilities that stretched far beyond its own borders. This new role would soon be tested in a major way. In the early 20th century, the world was thrown into chaos by 2 massive wars. World War I began in Europe in 1914. For 3 years, the United States tried to stay out of the conflict. But in 1917, it joined the war on the side of the Allies, including Britain and France. American soldiers helped turn the tide of the war, leading to victory in 1918. 2 decades later, an even bigger war began. World War II started in 1939. The United States entered the war in 1941 after Japan attacked the naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. Americans fought in Europe against Nazi Germany and in the Pacific against Japan. The war ended in 1945, but it was the most destructive conflict in human history. The end of World War II left the United States in a new and powerful position. Much of Europe and Asia was destroyed by the war, but the American homeland was untouched. Its economy was stronger than ever. The United States and the Soviet Union emerged from the war as the 2 most powerful countries in the world. They were known as the superpowers. However, they had very different ideas about how the world should be organized. The United States believed in democracy and capitalism. while the Soviet Union believed in communism. This difference in ideas led to a new kind of conflict, a long and tense period of rivalry known as the Cold War. The Cold War was not a direct fighting war between the United States and the Soviet Union. It was a war of ideas, of competition, and of influence. Both superpowers built up huge armies and thousands of nuclear weapons, creating a dangerous standoff. They competed for influence in other countries around the world, leading to conflicts like the Korean War and the Vietnam War. At home, this period was also a time of great fear and suspicion of communism. At the same time, the United States was racing against the Soviets in science and technology. This space race led to one of humanity's greatest achievements. In 1969, American astronauts were the first to walk on the moon. While the Cold War was happening on the global stage, a powerful struggle for justice was taking place inside the United States. For a century after the Civil War, African Americans were still treated as second-class citizens, especially in the South. They faced segregation and were denied their right to vote. The civil rights movement rose up to challenge this injustice. Led by brave figures like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., people used nonviolent protests, marches, and boycotts to demand equal rights. Their courage led to historic laws like the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which made segregation illegal and moved the nation closer to its promise of freedom and equality for all. The Cold War finally came to an end in the late 1980s and early 1990s. The communist system in the Soviet Union collapsed, and the Berlin Wall, a symbol of the division in Europe, was torn down. The United States was left as the world's only superpower. The end of the 20th century was a time of economic prosperity and technological change, with the rise of the internet connecting the world in new ways. But the new century brought new challenges. On September 11, 2001, terrorists attacked the United States, leading to long wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and a new focus on global terrorism. A few years later, a major economic crisis in 2008 affected the entire world. The story of America is long, complex, and still being written. From the first people who crossed a land bridge thousands of years ago to the modern, multicultural nation of today, its history is one of constant change, struggle, and adaptation. It is a story of great ideals like liberty and democracy, but also of difficult failures to live up to those ideals. It includes moments of inspiring unity and moments of painful division. The history of the United States reaches far beyond its 1776 Declaration of Independence. It is a rich and ongoing narrative that continues to shape the lives of its people and the direction of the world.